The sun had barely risen when the auction yard began to stir. Trucks rumbled in, trailers creaked open, and handlers shouted over the clang of gates and the shuffle of hooves. Farmers gathered near pens to inspect cattle and working dogs, many of them talking business with folded arms and tired eyes. Amid the noise and motion, one small pen in the corner remained quiet. Inside it lay a dog, medium-sized, brown and white, with fur that hadn't seen a brush in months. His right hind leg stuck out at an odd angle, and every time he shifted, he winced. Mud clung to his coat, but it couldn't hide the ribs beneath his skin or the raw spot near his shoulder where fur had stopped growing. He didn't bark or whimper. He just watched. No sign, no name, no collar. A handwritten tag hung loosely from the pen. Lot 47. He wasn't in the official program. One of the staff later said he'd been dropped off by a man who didn't want to keep him anymore. "Can't use a limping dog," the man had said before driving off. As buyers passed by, they glanced but didn't stop. "Poor thing," one woman muttered, but she kept walking. A pair of kids knelt by the gate, trying to get his attention. He looked at them, then lowered his head. Their mother pulled them back. Don't touch stray dogs. To most, he was already marked by failure. Not trained, not useful, not sellable. In another part of the yard, clean, healthy dogs waited in larger pens, barking sharply and wagging their tails. They got attention, questions, offers. Lot 47 got silence. Even the auctioneer barely noticed him as he walked by, flipping through a clipboard. The dog shifted again and licked his paw, trying to soothe it. The limp had likely been there for weeks, maybe longer. No one could say how he'd gotten hurt. He was just there, present, but overlooked. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of hay, oil, and dust. The dog sniffed the air, but didn't move. It wasn't fear in his eyes. It was resignation, like he had already figured out how this day would go. And judging by the lack of interest, he wasn't wrong. He wasn't barking. He wasn't whining. He was just waiting for someone to notice, for someone to care. But the crowd kept moving, and Lot 47 remained the dog no one wanted. By mid-morning, the auction yard was buzzing with conversation. The bleachers had begun to fill, and the smell of roasted peanuts and diesel lingered in the air. Most people were focused on the main pens, where the premium stock drew competitive offers and raised voices. But in quieter corners, talk started to drift toward the injured dog in the far stall. "He's still here?" one man asked, sipping lukewarm coffee. "Yeah, Lot 47, another replied. "Dropped off early this morning. No name, no record. Looks like he's had a rough go," someone else added. "Probably hit by a car." The stories came without proof, passed along in snippets like broken puzzle pieces. One woman said she recognized him from the edge of her property weeks ago, limping across a field. Another man claimed he saw him eating from a trash bin behind a gas station. Nobody really knew where he came from, but everyone agreed on one thing: he didn't belong here. He lay curled in his pen, head resting between his front paws, eyes half open. He didn't seem angry, just tired. His ears twitched at passing footsteps, but he never stood. Only when someone approached too quickly did he lift his head and shift his weight nervously, like a creature that had learned to expect the worst. A young boy tossed a cracker toward him. The dog sniffed it, but didn't eat. Hunger was there, but hesitation was stronger. "He's probably been on his own a while," a woman in boots murmured to her friend. "Dogs don't act like that unless they've had it rough." "Doesn't even bark." An old man nearby gave a short nod. "You can tell by the way he keeps one eye open, waiting for something bad to happen." Still, no one stepped closer. The staff had placed a metal water bowl beside him, now half empty. A few tufts of straw stuck to his damp fur. Every so often, he shifted his weight and gave his bad leg a cautious lick. It wasn't bleeding, but it wasn't healing either. A few pens down, dogs barked loudly as new people passed by. They begged for attention, tails wagging, tongues out. Lot 47 just lay still. A woman walked past and sighed. "Poor guy," she said, "but who'd want a dog with a limp?" It was the question everyone thought, but didn't say aloud. And for now, it had no answer. The sun had climbed higher by the time the auctioneer cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. "All right, folks, we're ready to start. First up, 2-year-old border collie, trained and ready to work." The crowd leaned in. Paddles went up, prices rose fast. Applause and laughter echoed between the wooden bleachers and dusty fences. The auction moved quickly. Goats, a few sheep, even a miniature donkey. Buyers shouted over one another with competitive fire. The pens emptied one by one. Animals left with new owners and freshly scribbled receipts. The energy buzzed, but in the far corner, Lot 47 still waited, unmoving, unnoticed. Finally, the auctioneer flipped a page on his clipboard and looked puzzled. Next. Lot 47. Injured male dog. No paperwork. He squinted across the barn as 2 handlers led the dog toward the front ring. One walked slowly to avoid startling him. The other kept a firm hold on the leash. The moment he stepped into the ring, the crowd changed. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Some people looked away. Others squinted, perhaps trying to see if he looked better up close. The dog didn't resist, but his posture shrank, ears flat, tail down, walking with a slight, painful hitch in his step. The auctioneer gave a polite, if hesitant, smile. "He's quiet, calm, could be a good companion. Starting bid at $5. Silence. The handlers looked around. No one raised a hand. A man near the back coughed. A woman whispered something to her friend and shook her head. One child leaned forward, but their father gently pulled them back. "Do I hear 5? The auctioneer tried again, his voice less confident. Still, nothing. "He limps," someone mumbled. "You have to pour money into a vet," another added. "I don't want to end up with someone's problem," said a third. The dog stood there in the sawdust, surrounded by people but utterly alone. His eyes scanned the crowd without expectation. This wasn't new to him. Being passed over had become normal. He didn't bark. He didn't plead. He just waited. The auctioneer let out a breath. "All right then, no bid." He reached for the gavel. And for a moment, everything seemed set. The dog would be led back to his pen, maybe removed from the list entirely, forgotten before the next lot came forward. But just as the gavel began to fall, there was a small movement at the back of the room. A single hand went up, quietly, without fanfare. And the room turned to look. The auctioneer froze mid-swing. The gavel hung in the air for a moment longer, then slowly lowered without a sound. All eyes shifted to the back row, where a figure stood with their hand still raised. It was a person in a gray coat, face mostly hidden by the brim of a worn hat. No one could recall seeing them earlier. They hadn't spoken to anyone. They hadn't placed any previous bids. They had simply sat there, watching. $5, the auctioneer confirmed, trying to sound upbeat. "We have 5. Anyone else?" He scanned the crowd out of habit, but he already knew the answer. No one raised a hand. No one whispered a counter. It was clear that this wasn't a competition. The dog looked up, eyes locking briefly with the quiet stranger across the room. For the first time all morning, he took a cautious step forward. "Sold," the auctioneer said finally, the word bouncing through the quiet space like an unexpected echo. He tapped the gavel gently, as if unsure whether to make the moment official. A few murmurs followed. "Who is that? Never seen them before. Why would someone pay for that dog?" The stranger didn't react. They simply lowered their hand and walked toward the front without a word. Their steps were even, calm, not rushed, not hesitant. As they approached the dog, the handlers glanced at one another, then handed over the leash without question. The dog didn't pull away. He didn't resist. He looked up at the stranger, who crouched slowly and extended a hand. No sudden movements, no high voice, just quiet presence. From the bleachers, people watched in silence. It was an odd moment, so simple, yet unexpectedly moving. The dog, who had been ignored, avoided, and nearly discarded, stood beside someone who didn't seem to care about his limp or his past. The stranger opened a small cloth pouch and pulled out a piece of cooked chicken. They didn't offer it right away. They just let the scent drift. The dog sniffed the air, then gently inched closer. His nose touched the stranger's hand. Then he sat. The transaction was over, but something deeper had just begun. A few auction-goers began to turn their attention back to the next lot, but others kept watching. Not because they expected anything dramatic, but because they sensed, somehow, that they had just witnessed a moment that mattered. The dog had been seconds from being forgotten, but someone had chosen him. The stranger led the dog gently out of the ring, not pulling the leash, just walking slowly and allowing the dog to follow at his own pace. There was no need for words between them. Something unspoken passed in each glance, in every cautious step. The dog, still unsure, glanced up often, but he never stopped walking. People watched them pass through the aisle, eyes filled with quiet curiosity. Someone clapped lightly, as if out of instinct. Another person gave a low whistle and said, "Well, I'll be." But the stranger didn't stop or acknowledge them. Their focus was entirely on the dog. They walked to a pickup truck parked just beyond the main barn. It wasn't shiny or new, but it was clean, with a thick blanket already laid across the passenger seat. The stranger opened the door and stepped aside. The dog looked up, hesitated briefly, then slowly climbed in. He circled twice, testing the blanket with one cautious paw, before curling into a tight ball. His head rested on the seat edge, his eyes still alert but softer than before. The stranger closed the door quietly and made their way around the truck. Before climbing in, they paused and looked back toward the auction barn, now buzzing again with activity. The bidding had resumed. Voices rose. Hands waved. Lot 47 was already out of sight, and for most, out of mind. But not for the stranger. They pulled away without fanfare, the truck's tires crunching over gravel as they drove past open fields and wooden fences. The dog didn't lift his head. He didn't whine or bark. He just rested, his breathing finally beginning to slow. Half a mile down the road, the truck pulled into a small roadside lot near a vet clinic. A few people were outside tending to garden beds, planting early spring flowers. The stranger parked, cut the engine, and reached over to scratch the dog gently behind the ear. "We'll start here," they said softly. It was the first word they'd spoken aloud since the auction. Inside the clinic, the receptionist looked up as the door opened. She smiled faintly, surprised. "Back again so soon?" she asked, recognizing the stranger. The stranger gave a short nod, then stepped aside to reveal the dog walking in slowly, eyes wide but calm. The receptionist looked down at him and smiled. "He's new," the stranger said quietly. The receptionist nodded. "Well, he's in the right place." The dog looked up, as if he somehow understood. For the first time, it felt like he had arrived. Not just somewhere safe, but somewhere meant for him. The exam room was quiet except for the occasional scribble of a pen and the soft humming of an old ceiling fan. The dog stood near the door, unsure whether to sit or lie down. His leg trembled slightly, not from pain, but from uncertainty. He wasn't used to closed spaces, fluorescent lights, or kind hands. The vet, a middle-aged woman with silver-framed glasses and a voice as calm as still water, crouched to his level. "He's underweight," she murmured, gently running her fingers along his side. "And that leg, it's an old injury, likely hit or twisted. He's been walking on it too long." The stranger stood quietly in the corner, arms folded loosely. They didn't interrupt, didn't explain. They let the vet work. As the exam continued, the dog slowly began to settle. He didn't flinch at the thermometer or the soft pressure of fingers around his paw. It wasn't comfort just yet, but it was the beginning of something close. He kept glancing at the stranger, as if checking to make sure they were still there. They always were. After the exam, the vet stood and gave a thoughtful nod. He needs rest, anti-inflammatories, a few weeks of patience. If you want, I can schedule x-rays to be safe. The stranger simply nodded. Schedule them. The dog was let out with a new collar, a fresh bowl of water, and a small bag of soft treats. He sniffed the receptionist's hand before accepting one, chewing slowly, eyes watching every move. Back in the truck, the blanket had been straightened. The stranger opened the passenger door and gave a small pat to the seat. The dog climbed up again, this time without hesitation. They drove in silence, winding through narrow back roads lined with trees. As the sky darkened, the truck pulled up to a modest house with a wooden porch and a quiet yard. No barking dogs, no noise, just stillness. The door creaked open. The stranger didn't pull the leash. They just waited, and after a moment, the dog stepped forward on his own. Inside, a warm space welcomed them. A bowl of water was already set near the wall. A soft bed lay by the heater. The stranger took off their coat, hung it on a peg, then sat on the floor nearby, not forcing anything. The dog stood there, watching. Then slowly, cautiously, he walked over and curled up beside them. No commands, no leash, just trust, earned, not taken. Days passed quietly at the edge of the countryside. The house was small but full of soft routines. Morning sun spilled through the windows. Birds sang in the trees just beyond the fence. And in that peace, the dog began to change. He still limped, but the stiffness in his leg eased little by little. Short walks became a part of his day. The stranger never rushed him. They walked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes with soft hums that the dog had come to recognize. His ears would perk at the sound of it. He never strayed far. There were no other animals in the house. No barking, no chaos. Just the steady presence of the stranger, who spoke sparingly but always with intention. "You're stronger than they knew," they said one evening, scratching behind his ear. The dog's eyes, once full of doubt, now watched with quiet trust. He had started wagging his tail, not wildly, but enough to speak a language of his own. He would sit near the stranger while they worked in the garden, or rest beside the porch steps in the fading light. One rainy afternoon, the stranger sat at the kitchen table, reading an old book with a cracked spine. The dog lay curled on the rug, eyes half closed, ears twitching with each roll of thunder. "You know," the stranger said thoughtfully, "you can't just stay at Lot 47 forever." The dog blinked. The stranger leaned back in their chair, watching him. "Names matter. They mean someone saw you, chose you." They flipped through the pages, then paused, as if remembering something. "Hollis," they said aloud. "That was a name I once read in a story. Quiet, strong, survived a lot." The dog lifted his head. "Hollis," the stranger repeated, letting the name linger in the room. The dog stood slowly, walked over, and rested his head against the stranger's leg. It was enough. From that day forward, he had a name. Neighbors began to notice the pair on walks, always side by side. "Didn't think that dog would come around," one man said with a smile. "But look at him now." Hollis didn't need to run fast or jump high. He didn't need to do tricks or herd cattle. All he had to do was be there, present, healing. And every evening, when the porch light flickered on and the stars appeared overhead, Hollis would curl at the stranger's feet, safe in a world that finally made space for him. Months had passed since the auction, the day the world almost forgot him. Now, Hollis stood in the tall grass behind the house, a light breeze running through his coat. The limp remained, but it no longer defined him. He walked with purpose, even if slowly. He was no longer the dog with the injury. He was simply Hollis. The stranger stood nearby, tending to the garden beds, pulling weeds with quiet patience. Hollis stayed close, watching every move. Their bond had deepened into something more than companionship. It was quiet loyalty, mutual trust, the kind of connection that didn't need words. On weekends, visitors sometimes came, neighbors bringing vegetables, old friends of the stranger stopping by. Hollis greeted them all with polite curiosity. Some would crouch to pet him,